do we measure the innocence of a child's life? Would we measure it by value, by usefulness, or by fragility? Or is it the case that innocence is inherent and cannot be measured? Maybe there is no gradation, no gray area, no middle ground. Perhaps innocence either exists or it does not. Every day that we are allowed to enjoy the freedoms and pleasure this country has to offer, a growing number of children are having their innocence ripped away.
Under the federal law, anyone who recruits, patronizes, solicits a minor under the age of 18 for the purposes of a commercial sex act can be found guilty of trafficking. Upwards of 80% of all confirmed sex trafficking cases involve U.S. citizens, and up to 40% of those cases involve the sale of children.
Unfortunately, to some of our fellow countrymen, destroying the human spirit in a child is a worthy sacrifice for a lucrative and flourishing business. However, this goes well beyond the sickening perversion of the flesh. There exists an occultic evil that has been awakened through a powerful group of underground elite who enjoy preying upon the most helpless among us. These demonically fueled agents of sexual abomination regard the bright light of innocence as a trivial and inconvenient flame that must be snuffed out. We must not close our eyes from the sting of the smoke any longer. It is time we look upon the smoldering ashes of what used to be our children, become properly horrified, and finally decide to adopt within ourselves an insatiable motivation to expel this scourge from our land. It's time to stop ignoring the desperate cries of our children.
On a cold day in February of 1987, a Tallahassee woman notices 6 disheveled and malnourished children at a park in the company of 2 well-dressed men. Something feels wrong about the situation, so she calls the police. What follows would prove to be a source of conspiracies, cover-ups, and confusion for decades to follow. In 2018 and 2019, a series of official police reports and government documents concerning a secret group known as the Finders were released to the public, confirming the suspicions of many regarding the American government's involvement in cover-ups. The official story speaks of a post-hippie commune who had some rather unorthodox ways of living, but were by and large harmless. The group, who called themselves the Finders, were seen as off-the-grid futurists who kept to themselves and enjoyed teaching their children certain lessons through so-called hands-on experiences. 2 weeks after the initial call to police was made, the entire case was dropped and was largely forgotten by the public. However, the recent release of official documents concerning the Finders tells a very different story. What follows is the story told directly from official yet heavily redacted documents provided by the U.S. government and official police records. Tallahassee police arrived on the scene to question the 2 men and their involvement with the 6 unkempt children in their care. The 2 men were unable to provide information regarding their custody of the children and were reportedly uncooperative in providing their own or the children's identities. Officers decided to bring the 2 men and children into custody for further questioning, during which information was divulged linking this case to Washington, D.C. When the Tallahassee Police Department contacted the Metropolitan Police Department in D.C., it was revealed the MPD had information concerning a group known as the Finders, based in D.C. The MPD issued search warrants on 2 properties owned by the Finders, When police searched one of the properties, an unused preschool, they discovered a plastic plate with 3 hand-drawn pentagrams on it. They also discovered over 100 animal bones. When police investigated another property, a farm in Virginia, they discovered what was reported as evidence of satanic cult rituals and cages that witnesses claimed were used to keep children in. It was also reported that a special agent with the United States Customs Service claimed to have observed documents containing instructions for obtaining children, including purchasing, trading, and kidnapping them, and also impregnating women. There was apparently reason to believe the finders had infiltrated and were working with the government on a state and federal level. A member of the finders, named Isabella, was discovered to have worked for the government from 1950 to 1971. It was alleged that the finders were involved in an organized child abuse scheme that was being covered up by the State Department and the FBI's Foreign Counterintelligence Section. In the official documents, it is stated an individual whose name was redacted became convinced that numerous other children had been abused and that this was all part of a large, well-organized scheme. The testimony of the children did not help end any suspicions. When questioned, the children said they were being weaned from their mothers. They also described games the adult in the finders group would play with them, including taking a man's clothes off, though apparently just the jacket, and seeing women walking around naked. When one of the children was asked about how the group operated, she said there was a man known as the game caller named Marion Petty who would tell them all what to do, such as read bulletin boards, take notes, and babysit at people's houses. When one of the children was asked about possible sexual abuse, she reportedly became evasive and fidgety before denying any inappropriate behavior occurred and wanting to end the interview. During the interview, the children were reported to all be extremely hungry and apparently in deteriorating health as they urinated and defecated on the floor. After the interview, the children were medically examined, where it was discovered that 2 of the children, named Max and Mary, were confirmed cases of sexual abuse. Concerning these 2 cases, the Tallahassee Police Department offense reporting form specifically says Max lacks anal specter control consistent with previous sodomy. Mary, right half of hymen is absent, enlarged orifice, consistent with digital penetration, but would not rule out penile penetration. It would seem, with all of this evidence, it would have been an open and shut case of at least sexual abuse of children. However, the entire investigation was called off on February 18th, only 2 weeks after it was first launched, and the 2 men involved were released from custody with all charges against them dropped. The date of the original report, which contained the confirmation of sexual abuse, was dated February 4th, 1987. However, an affidavit which was written sometime on or after February 5th of 1987 stated the children were all examined for sexual abuse at a hospital in Tallahassee, but the results of the examination were not available at this time. If we look at the Tallahassee Police Department offense reporting form, we can confirm that the date of the original report describing the sexual abuse was February 4th, 1987, with a date of February 9th, 1987, listed under date of this report, all of which were days before the whole investigation was called off on February 18th. It was also reported that the children discovered in Tallahassee were eventually turned over to individuals claiming to be parents or guardians. Even more, it was claimed there was no evidence to link the finders to sexual abuse of children or satanic activity. It was reported that the judging of the lifestyle choices of the finders was subjective, and that investigations revealed there was no group or individual actions that appeared abusive or neglectful. The evidence that was previously uncovered was largely ignored and dismissed. Adding to the mystery, Among the official documents was a strange report dated April 13, 1987, from the Domestic Security Branch of the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington, D.C., titled The Finders Investigation. It alleges that the Finders have been utilized by the CIA to spread disinformation to other organizations in the U.S. and overseas. It claims they are capable of destructive and illegal activities. The writer of the report doesn't believe the child abuse was originally planned, but developed because of the sick and demented subjects in the cult. The report does say, however, that the shaping of the children was a planned experiment similar to the Nazis in order to form a perfect society. The writer states he doesn't believe the Finders have disbanded, but rather believes they are still active. Given all of this released information, and considering the inconsistencies found within the reports, many believe the Finders, or a splinter group, are still alive and well today, preying on young children behind the scenes through kidnapping, sex trafficking, and illegal international exportation with the protection of the deep state within the United States government. However, what if the Finders are just the tip of the iceberg?
That video was just the beginning of this strange and disturbing journey I've been on the past year or so. It started when I read my good friend Tom Horn's book, Shadowland. And in that, he talks about some connections between the US government and child sex trafficking rings. So I wanted to see where this began and really how widespread it is today. I started with the Finders, but during investigation for that project, I found out a lot more that couldn't be condensed down into a short 10-minute video. Something else that kept me going, I live in a small town, middle of nowhere. While I was researching for the Finders, I was seeing all of these news reports and articles about child sex trafficking rings in areas local to me. So it made me wonder, I have kids myself. How safe are my kids in a small town? If it's happening here, where else is it happening? Is this just everywhere? Part of the problem too is in researching this stuff, I realized how much sensational conspiracy stuff is out there. I was finding it really difficult to separate truth from this sensational stuff. And because of that, I didn't know what was really going on. So it was about that time I decided I am not researching for a book. I'm not researching for a YouTube video. I wasn't even researching for my own curiosity. I was researching for a documentary because I needed to talk to experts who are working in this field, who are on the front lines fighting against this, and who aren't afraid to talk with someone like me on camera about what they know. I knew that was the only way I was going to get to the truth of this matter, so that's exactly what I did.
Hi, my name is Jakub Boyens. We started fighting sex trafficking because it deeply touched our family personally. My sister Ilonka went through an experience of being trafficked over a period of 6 years.
I am Ilonka Deaton. I grew up in a little town called Brakpan outside of Johannesburg, South Africa. Growing up there was a home of a single parent, 2 amazing brothers. I had a really good childhood. Fun, sports, loving environment, and just being a kid. Music was a part of my life as far back as I can remember. So at 12 years old, there was a national singing competition. I brought the flyer home, begged my mom to, enter me into it. She did. I went through several rounds of it and ended up winning this competition, singing Whitney Houston's The Greatest Love of All. And I got an opportunity or an offer to sign my first record deal. And to me, that was just somebody hanging the moon. I was just elated. My dad wasn't actively involved in my life, even though we would periodically see him. He wasn't what I would call a daddy. Like I wasn't a daddy's girl because I didn't have that opportunity to form that kind of relationship with him. So when the music manager stepped into my life, and to give you perspective, he is someone who is about almost 6 or 7 years older than my mother. So he would be in his early 70s now. And he kind of filled that void for me. I can remember thinking as a 12-year-old girl, this is what it must be like when you have a dad who's investing in your life, because he really started mentoring me. I just thought that he was a good person who really cared for me, who cared for my family. And he really, through the first year of my sign career, he gained the trust of not only me, but the trust of my mom, and just became part of our family.
Child sex trafficking is really the sexual exploitation of children, or to really get down to what it really is, the rape of children, but repeated rape. This is forceful. This is not something that's pleasant for any individual, even if a rape occurs one time, but these children are trafficked over and over, average 5 to 15 times per day. We are in excess of 500,000 kids per day being trafficked in the United States, with only 1% of the crime reported.
As part of my anti-trafficking work, I've met victims in Russia, I've met victims in India, I've met victims that have been trafficked from Mexico, victims in New York and New Jersey and all across our country. I've been on FBI raids where I've seen things that no person should ever see. I've seen video content of a child that's the same age as mine being raped by an American man that was a sex tourist in Cambodia. And this child was so conditioned by her environment that she thought she was engaging in play. We had received a call from the Department of Homeland Security telling us that a 7-year-old girl was being sexually abused, and that content was being spread around the dark web. And she had been being abused, and they'd watched her for 3 years, and they could not find the perpetrator.
So it's an epidemic. It's a true epidemic in our culture. It's a silent crime. It's in every zip code in the United States.
I'm David Heavener. I've made over 50 films for HBO, Showtime, networks, a lot of indie films. You know, I've written, directed, starred, produced. I've been a distributor ended up a distributor for many years. My first connection with human trafficking was making films abroad. And I would have to hire local, I won't say which country, and I noticed there was things going on in the set where people were being told what to do, but they were like robots. And so I started digging deeper, and I got deep enough where they said, David, you don't want to ask any more questions. You know, we're just doing this co-production here. You need to get the movie done. That was my first, and this was 20 years ago. Then I, after working as a missionary in Central America, I'd look up at billboards saying, are you being trafficked? And so I started digging deeper into that. Well, it comes from the South up through into the United States, because the United States is one of the biggest buyers. So that was my second. My third is starting to dig in domestically here in the States and finding out what is going on with this human trafficking issue. So I said, okay, of the whole United States, what state seems to be the most influential in the world of sex trafficking? I looked at Georgia. And I said, of Georgia, what city? I looked at Atlanta. Okay, Atlanta has a lot of non-stops in from Central and South America right into Atlanta. And I'm going, okay, of what area of Atlanta is the most influential of sex trafficking? Well, East Atlanta. It's East Cobb, actually, to be exact. This was a few years ago. I go, well, that's very interesting. What's the demographics of East Cobb? White, male, upper, middle class income. I was calling some officials, I'm going to say officials, and I don't want to go any further than that I knew, and I was telling them what I was finding. I had two say, just leave it alone. You know, where are you going? What does this mean?